We're going to have a great interview because I have the woman with whom I was having a conversation at the Christine Gallagher event that I went to several weeks ago. And that conversation led directly to this entire series because it really helped me gain a lot of clarity on kind of the nature of the problem that people who have a history of emotional trauma and are trying to either get into entrepreneurship or feel happy and successful in their businesses really struggle with. The idea that kind of the core issue is that they learn not to trust themselves and learn not to trust their emotions and block that out. And emotional health is, to me, the foundational, fundamental, key entrepreneurial skill that everybody needs. And so I'm really looking forward to this interview from KatherineKrupka.com. Katherine Krupka, thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
So, you kind of heard in the setup, we had long conversations at the event about this idea of emotional health. What I want to start with is just kind of who you are and where you are today. And my intent for the interview is to bring out a little bit about some of what you struggled with in the past and how you got through that so that people who have struggles in their business today can kind of learn from that, that there's hope, that they can get through it. And not necessarily that it's going to look for them exactly as it looked for you, but we want to start getting into some of that. So, how's business?
Business is good and better than I ever could have dreamed, honestly. I don't know, became an entrepreneur almost by default. I started doing work kind of as a hobby and just as a service to people who knew me and knew some of what I did. And by referral, it's grown. And then I reached the point where it's like, okay, let's take this to the next level and actually actively tell people what I'm doing, which honestly is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. Um, and it works. And the more that I'm open to sharing my experience, what I do, what my own path has been, then the more people who I can serve, and the more people who come to me. So things are good, and it's a lot of fun, which is probably one of the most important things for me.
And so I hear that you're happy with it. I hear that you're fulfilled by it. Is the money coming along with it?
It is. It is. I mean, there's always more. And the fact that I live in what is now considered the most expensive city in the country, and I'm doing absolutely fine, and have the freedom to pretty much choose, when I work, when I can disappear for a few days and go someplace else or things like that uh, is an amazing feeling. It's just an amazing feeling.
I think a lot that's kind of the feeling that entrepreneurs are looking for, business owners are looking for when they get started.
I think it is. I think for most of us who are led to entrepreneurship one way or another, I suspect that freedom is one of our top values. And that's probably why we go that route. And the fact that it can work. Uh, Even when I thought, oh, my little gremlin mind was like, well, this can't happen like this, and that can't be like that, and you'll never be able to do this. And the fact that it is almost, I don't want to say in spite of that, little voice, but with work around that little voice, that it is doing what is possible, is an extraordinary experience, and one that I know is available for all of us.
Yeah, and that little voice is what trips up a lot of people. Some people
Yeah.
will give into that, where some people hear that and are able to proceed anyway.
It's a big deal, and it's something I've worked with a tremendous amount myself, and is what I do with a lot of my clients. The little voice comes from a place of limitation and a place of fear, and there is an argument that there's a way in which it's trying to serve us. Maybe I don't know that it really matters, but the choice is what do we want to do with it, and how do we create enough discernment around that voice, right? To know that that isn't me, my truth, it is a little voice. Um, and when we can get a little bit of distance on it, we have the opportunity to exercise choice. Do I choose to go with what this voice is saying to me, or do I want to tune into something deeper and something truer and then move with that? What I found for myself is fighting that voice, right? Mine always says some form of like, Catherine, you can't do that, right? And if I fight with it, then we're still giving that voice energy. We're still engaging with it, even if it's the same almost as giving into it, right? Because if
Yeah.
I'm fighting it, I'm locked in, right? And I've locked that pattern, locked that limiting energy in place. If I say, "Oh, I hear that voice. I recognize what that is. Why don't you go play in the street for a little bit, and I'm going to do something else, right? I'm going to tune into my deeper truth." And then that's what I've seen is the most effective way to work with it. I don't think they ever go away. It'd be great if they did, and if I find a way, then I'll retire pretty quickly. But
Right.
right,
The coaching will be easy. I think
right,
the thing that I've come to realize more and more recently is that fighting, a lot of times it feels like we're fighting with other people, but when we're fighting with ourselves, it really is just a lose-lose proposition. You can't win that fight either way.
absolutely,
And this is the
absolutely.
work that you do now with your coaching clients in your business now.
It is very much so. Working with the voice, which is happening at a conscious and subconscious level, and getting that distance so we can recognize and be a choice around what we do with it. The other part of my work, though, is really reaching to the unconscious level. Um, you can think of it as like the blueprint for our entire system, our whole constitution, our whole makeup, physical, mental, emotional, the whole thing. Or you can think of it as like the operating system on the computer, right? The stuff that's on the machine even when we buy it. So we don't really know what it is. We don't really know how it operates. We don't have an easy access point to it, but it defines our user interface. It defines our experience with that device, which is ourselves and our whole life.
Yeah.
So the other thing I do with my work is really reach to that unconscious level where we'll have old, or just so deeply ingrained belief patterns of limitation, of self-punishment, of fear, of any number of things, or trauma that we've experienced at some point in our lives that we haven't been able to access in a way that allows us to actually release it. So working from that unconscious level and sort of wiping the hard drive clean, if you want to keep it in computer terms, and then we're really able to start afresh from what's true for us.
And I want to dig more into some of how that works, but a little bit more about you setting that up. I mean, do we assume that you coach this because it's always come easy to you, or
I wish. I wish. And, it's one of those things where I think we've all had the experience. If we hadn't been through what we've been through, we wouldn't be where we are. I started out, my first career was as a diplomat and as an international business consultant. And I did that for almost 20 years. And toward the end of it, I was working in some strange and difficult countries and lived in Russia for about 10 years where I was running the operations for a very large global consulting company. Was super successful. Everyone's like, "Wow, you'll be the youngest managing director in the company. You're great." And meanwhile, all I could see was just darkness. The last probably 2.5 years. Um, couldn't find a way out. Didn't feel any connection to what I was doing. Didn't feel any purpose. I mean, just that kind of dark closing in thing, and literally reached the point where I was suicidal. While everyone outside went, "Wow, you're so successful. You've got it made. It's all great for you." And there was nothing left inside, just nothing. Um, and through a whole series of, one of those little synchronicity kind of events that tend to happen for us when we reach our end point, learned a lot about natural healing, had my own awakening, if you want to call it that, to really understand where I'd completely lost touch with myself and my sense of why I'm here.
so if we stick with that situation a little bit longer, a lot of people in business will think, well, I'm unhappy in my business. It must be something wrong with the business, or it must be something wrong with the market, or it must be something about the economy. And we'll just look to
Yeah.
change that situation, to change the environment, to change the circumstances. How did you experience that, or make that distinction?
I went through a fair period where I thought, oh, this is about the country, right? I mean, things in the Russia in the late 90s were pretty weird and kind of dark and wild. And so I thought, oh, it's about that. Oh, it's about my job. I work too many hours, right? It's too stressful. And I really realized that wasn't the case. Um, and I think what brought me to that realization is, I mean, for me, I had to hit the ultimate wall, right? And hopefully no one else has to do that because it was not fun. Um, but when we get to the point where we realize, wow, where is my role in this? And not, I mean, there's a level of taking responsibility, but not in the sense of, oh, now let me beat up on myself because I made bad choices or missed these signposts or something. But really, like, wow, where have I cut off from something that's important to me, right? My values, things I believe in, my sense of self, my understanding of a bigger purpose. And then we can start to see, oh, wow, here's where I'm maybe not showing up fully as myself, right? Or here's maybe where I'm cutting myself off in certain ways. And then we've got power to look at things and to actually change the things we really can. I had an experience when I was leaving my job from Manhattan and moved down to this beautiful beachfront healing institute in Puerto Rico. And I went, oh, now it's going to be perfect, right? No stress. Everything's beautiful, right? It's like a dream come true. And I was still really stressed out. It wasn't about the job. It wasn't Manhattan. It wasn't, it was me. And if someone can be completely stressful on the beach with someone else taking care of all the life details for you, then guess what? That's an internal. And that was really my wake up when I realized, oh, it's all my stuff.
How did you see that? Like, what was the stress? What did that feel like to be in that environment where you knew you shouldn't, there was no cause for this. It doesn't make any sense. It must be coming from inside me. How did
What
you
was
start to
really,
recognize that?
I think the way I recognize it is the fact that I was the only one around who was feeling stressed, right? I'm still, running lists in my head all the time and, not sleeping that well. And people were reflecting it back to me, right? And they're like, wow, Katherine, what's going on? Wow, you still got those lines on your forehead. And there's no reason for any of that. Or one time, I mean, the best example is I thought, man, I need to get away for a long weekend. So I was going to another beach on the other side of the island to get away for a weekend. And someone said to me, people come here to get away, Katherine.
Right.
And that I think was like the real click where I went, all right, this is not about anything in my environment. This is totally
Yeah.
my own
Wow.
game.
And one of the stories that I talk about from my experience is that I've always been in technology, and so I built three or four technology businesses, and I actually just sold one. And what's remarkable about that is not that I started a business that I sold. What it, was that the previous three were I walked away from in frustration because I kept building these businesses,
Mhm.
and then 2, 3, 4 years in, I would just be so frustrated and so disappointed and so miserable with it that I just scrap the whole thing and walk away and start over again. And then probably 2.5 years ago, I was getting in that same situation again, where I was like just saying, this business isn't working, the market sucks, and I'm not doing it right, and I don't know what's going on, and I hate it, and I'm going to get out of it. But I finally had to realize, just like you said, in that pattern, that, oh, maybe what's in common in all these situations is me, not something to do with the environment. Do you see that a lot of people need to kind of come to that recognition to be able to start healing it, or how
Yeah,
do you see that?
I think that's one of the situations where recognition is. I mean, I'll say crucial. I don't want to make it an absolute globalization because nothing's absolute. But I think that's one of those where recognition is an absolute key. And I see a lot of situations. People come to me with relationship patterns that over and over and over, or business patterns like yours, or just wow, I'm doing something that's important in my life, and I get right to here, and then I drop back. Right, it becomes this kind of Sisyphean sort of experience for people. And that's where the recognition of, oh, wow, exactly what you were saying, right? What's the common thread in all of this? And that would be
Yeah.
me. And I find sometimes people have a difficult time accepting that realization because it does start to look like, oh, I'm at fault, which isn't really the case, right? Um, and so it brings responsibility actually in a positive way because what it does is as soon as I say, oh, I'm the common thread here, then I have the power to do something different. If
Yeah.
it's the economy and other people and the market or whatever, then I've got nothing. I have no wiggle room to make anything different happen.
And I
So
really I really like that you framed it as recognition and acceptance and not understanding.
yeah,
Because one of the things that I think a lot of people struggle with, that I used to struggle with, is like I'd always want to jump from, okay, well, I see that, but what does it mean? How do I make sense of it? How do I explain this? If that's how I can fix it. And the message that I always try and reinforce to people watching these interviews is that, first of all, if you're just resigned that there's no solution, you're probably not even going to be watching anyway. But if
Right.
you're watching and you don't understand how it all fits together, that's totally okay. Just
Yes.
keep building the awareness, keep recognizing, keep striving to accept. You don't have to necessarily understand right now to be on that journey.
That's an extremely good point. And really, I find that the question of how, in a lot of cases, is is a fear-based question, actually, and and can hold us back in a lot of ways, right? I have a vision for my business, and I get stuck on, okay, well, how do I do, X, Y, and Z, and how do
Right.
I get from A to B? And then it drops us into this whole like blah, kind of, that's a technical term, by the way, sort of energy, right? And feeling, and then we go, I don't know, therefore I stop, right? When we really, really tune into the what and the why, the how, I don't want to say takes care of itself, because there's plenty of work for us to do in our learning and in our action steps and all of that. But it becomes a much, much smaller question. And in the case of, why am I holding this limiting belief? Or why uh, does this pattern keep repeating? It really isn't that important. I mean, a lot of times later we'll get the understanding of why, but it's not nearly as important as the recognition that it's happening. What do I want to see different? And why? Really, the why question is much more important than people give credit to, I guess.
Yeah.
Why do I really want this to be different? And that's the energy that allows us to move into something different.
So you touched on that, maybe this comes from someplace, but it's not as critical right now to understand where that comes from, but you may get that understanding. One of the dynamics I see is a lot of people will say, on one hand, yes, I'm totally frustrated and anxious and fearful and full of anger and I hate my business. And on the other hand, I'm really struggling in my business and I'm not getting the results that I want and I'm not making the money that I want and I don't have the free time that I want. And they just kind of like stop there without seeing that connection. And I see that also, I mentioned emotional trauma and kind of the setup for this show is that people will say, well, sure, my parents were divorced, or sure, my dad beat me, or sure, my, mom was an alcoholic, but what's that have to do with today? From your experience, do you have any, I mean, can I ask if you have anything that
Yeah.
you can share in terms of the insight that you learned in terms of maybe where some of that came from?
Yeah. Um, I see a lot of situations where people have had or experienced really, you know, beyond the pale trauma at points in their lives. And for sure, that sets up a lot of limiting parameters, right? If I do this, uh-oh, this could trigger. If I go here, that might happen. And so a lot of it is on an unconscious level, right? When we experience a trauma, it's as though we set up all kinds of rules. All right, if I avoid this, don't do that, stay in this box, what have you, then I won't be exposed to more of that kind of experience or trauma, right? So we aren't consciously always thinking this, but that's what we do. So it creates a lot of uh, un, parameters that are now unnecessary. They were adaptations at the time that may very well have been useful for a period, and now, either because of what we're doing in our businesses or someplace else in our life, those we're bumping up against those, right? And that brings that kind of frustration, that sort of anger. I also find that a lot of times people will hang on to the story around trauma, which is natural, right? I'm not, criticizing or anything with that. And I've done that myself with my own little trauma, not little, but with my own trauma. Um, when we let go of that story, right? Oh, because of this, that means I will always this, right? Uh, then we have freedom to say, oh, well, that was then, and that was useful, and that's not true anymore. Is that really my situation? Is that really who I am now? Is this really still what's going on around me now? And then we get the freedom to start expanding those walls. And if we do this kind of unconscious work and a lot of different levels of it, a lot that people can actually even do on their own, we just start removing those walls, right? Because they aren't really useful for us anymore. And they fall away. And what we find then that old adage of our greatest weakness shall be our greatest strength. And I absolutely believe that that can be true for us. And the same things that we held back, the same things that we felt were injured, the same things that were repressed, if you will, as a result of our experiences now get to really grow and flourish. And wow, that propels us forward.
Is there anything that you, and if you're not, it's totally fine. Is there anything you're
Yeah.
comfortable sharing about your own trauma and the dynamic between how that contributed to the situation where when things from the outside seemed to be going really well, all you could see was the darkness and frustration?
Yeah. Um, I would say that having felt that experience, we're really, and it's fascinating because I'll be honest, at this point, I can't access that feeling anymore, for which I'm very grateful. I remember it,
And
and I
not
can't
out of
feel it.
denial
No,
because
but
it's
that
been
I'm
processed.
complete with it. You
Yeah.
know, I'm complete with that, which is a brilliant feeling. However, having had that uh, brought to me the realization: A, this is how far off our track we can go. This is how shut down one can get. Um, Anytime I get even, I've got like signals now that are 10 miles from where I was that say, oops, Katherine, you're a little off. You're shutting something down. Something's not coming through. You're closing something off from fear, ultimately.
And
And
that's
then
to
I can,
say, recognizing that you're moving back towards that
yeah,
mindset that the injured child has to develop, that
exactly.
versus recognizing that that's not the situation anymore.
Correct, right? And okay, so wow, I'm kind of, touching back into that pattern. A really good example. I shut down a lot of things after that experience, right? Anything corporate just felt icky. Anything, kind of executive sort of stuff just felt icky. Any kind of, all these things that I associated with that period just became, I shut them down. My clients were government ministers. They were oligarchs. They were like bigger than life people by and large. And so I just shut down that whole thing. And I also shut down my own strong business sense, right? I ran a super successful business there. And when I went to start my own, wow, all these things where I was like, oh, well, I don't want to do that. Oh, I don't want to work with those people. Oh, I don't want to go there. And I thought, why am I doing this? What's going on that now I'm creating this little bitty, oh, let me work with these kind of people and we're going to do this kind of work and it's all going to be nice. And, I'll just kind of play it like a big hobby instead of an actual business because I had shut down my access to those parts of myself because I had like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, basically, right? Ew, this was part of that experience. I don't want to have that again. I'm not going here.
So this is
And when I
the subconscious remembering that injury and doing whatever it takes to say, don't expose
to
yourself to
not
this
go
again.
anywhere near it,
Yeah.
right? I don't want to be within 100 miles of that thing. So when I realized that's what I was doing, um, I went, wow. So, let me think through, right? Is it true that my running a business is going to take me to that place? No. I could run a business in a way that would get me there again. I don't have to. There are all these other ways. And so partly thinking through it. And then for myself, because of the work I do, I could, remove things energetically and repattern and that kind of thing. So did that and then just allowed my conscious mind to work through the actual facts, right? Does this mean that this is going to happen? No, none of it does. And wow, how much more of me is there to share with my clients, to be able to put my work out there, to be able to help people um, that I'm not giving them because I've shut this whole aspect of me down. And once I started reincorporating that, wow, I felt stronger. It was a whole block of thought and energy, literally even physical energy, like, yay, let's go, that I had completely shut down. So now that starts to open up and everything begins to get more textured, more colored, and what I can do for my clients, because a lot of them are in business, entrepreneurs or, running divisions of larger companies, things like that. Um, that gets stronger because I'm more present.
And that process of self protection or maybe even self sabotage is clearly not a conscious thing. It doesn't feel like I'm trying to protect myself from this or I'm afraid of this happening again. It just feels like, well, these are my options and this is how I make my decisions. How did you start to like unravel that, or did it all just kind of come apart with the healing?
Good question. How did I start to unravel it? I would say first I was recognizing where I was experiencing limitations.
Back to recognition.
It's key, right? I was recognizing where am I experiencing limitations and what I'm doing now,
Yeah.
right? I was happy with my work, not thrilled. I kept feeling there's something more, right? There's a bigger place I can take this. There's more I can do for my clients. Uh, and why? And I was also feeling the resistance, right? Business still felt icky. Certain types of environments still felt icky. And if they felt, pardon me, icky, there's a reason for that. So recognizing, when an opportunity would come to speak to a law firm or something, and I went, eh, what's up with that, right?
Yeah.
Why? It's a perfect group for me to work with, right? What's going on? And it's so, again, recognition and exploration of, I find myself feeling resistance here. What's up,
So this
right?
is
And so,
another phase where you now, instead of just kind of seeing nothing but the darkness and hopelessness around you, now you're learning to trust the feelings that you're having that are saying something's not quite right. Maybe you should ask some more questions about this.
yeah, and that brings up a really good point. I want to make a little distinction between feeling and emotion because there is, right? I would have a feeling, this just feels right? Bad or icky, or I'm feeling resistance around this. And an emotion is a little bit different, right? That's just sort of energy moving that we attach a story to, and it becomes a mental process. And I may be going into too much right here. Um, but that feeling of, and having just enough distance to recognize a feeling, right? Oh, I'm feeling
Okay.
icky, right? It's not just an unconscious, nah, no thanks, I think I'm going to be busy that day, or nah, that's not my target audience, or whatever it is. But to be aware enough of what's going on inside to go, something's feeling strange here. What's up? And then get curious.
And this
Get
is
curious.
the feeling. So is it fair to say that the things that we feel physically in our body are our mind's attempt to
Yeah.
communicate with us?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. In fact, it's a really key tool that I work with my clients to develop more strongly. Right, a lot of people in our society are very, very cut off from what's going on in their body. We kind of operate, here up a lot of times, and to really get in touch, like, oh wow, I've got some strange feeling in my stomach, or oh, my shoulder just got a little twinge. To recognize those things and get curious. Wow, what is my body telling me right now? What's going on? What's that biofeedback? It's the ultimate biofeedback. What is my body telling me right now? Because everything is intertwined, right? Body, mind, energy, spirit, all that stuff. They're distinctions we create for the purpose of our own thinking, but they're actually false. They're false distinctions. It is all one thing. So if my body's saying, "Ooh, that gives me a strange feeling in my stomach," our key is get curious, right? Don't judge it. Don't go ew, but go, huh? I wonder what's going on here.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the areas where the emotional trauma, things like abuse and bullying, can introduce a really specific challenge because a lot of people who go through that will just, this was the case for me. I just stopped paying attention to the feelings,
Yeah,
and it was really difficult for me to kind of retrain myself to pay attention to it, to even notice that it was there, to learn to interpret it more correctly, and to go through the
yes,
process of you know, learning to do that in a healthy, mature way versus the way a helpless child does, which is to say, "Look, this situation sucks. There's nothing I can do about it, so I'm just going to shut down."
shut down.
How do you,
Exactly.
what's the is the bridge there really just again that recognition and building on that and starting to experience that again?
I think that's the key, and knowing and trusting that our body is telling us something that's useful, right? That's useful for us now. So recognize what that is, know that it's useful. And I think a lot of times when we post trauma, when we shut things down, our awareness really, we shut our awareness down of what's going on in our system. It is, it's a sense of protection. This feels icky. I don't want to do that again. I don't want to hang out there. I don't want to feel this. So we tend to we stuff more and more because we're afraid none of it's going to feel good, right? And when we get to the place where we can say, okay, this is simply a sensation in my body. There's not necessarily a story around it. I don't have to re-experience anything. I'm not creating anything. I'm simply saying, oh, wow, my left shoulder feels strange right now. I wonder what's going on. And then we can interact with that from a physical standpoint, right? Let me breathe into that. Let me pay attention to it and see what changes or see what comes up, knowing that whatever it is that our body's telling us is something useful for us now.
And is this the process of acceptance?
It is. It's the practice of acceptance, and it's the process of allowing things to change. Because when we have, a twinge in our body, or we have stopped ourselves from feeling something, or have stuffed an emotion, we've gotten something stuck. And when things are stuck, we're stuck ultimately, right? In whatever we're choosing to express in our lives right now. The business we're seeking to build, the vision for what we're wanting to do, the relationship we're in the process of creating, whatever that is, we've created these like speed bumps, right, on the path of our moving toward that. So when I recognize this and trust, my awareness says, my shoulder feels strange. My trust says whatever my body's seeking to tell me right now is useful for me in where I'm going now, right? It's a place where I have, on some level, held myself back. And again, usually we don't need to know why. Why is my shoulder showing up this way? I don't need to know. I do need to know it feels really strange, and if I breathe into it, it feels to move a little bit around toward the back. Oh, well, if I look at it differently, or if I say, what color is that? And it turns blue, that is also information. And all of these ways of our interacting with these patterns allow them to move without our necessarily having to delve into, oh, is this because when I was 3 I fell down the stairs and nobody was there to help me or something? We don't need to know that usually.
So
We
I'm,
need to interact with what's present to us right
yeah.
now, allow it to move, and then open for where we're going.
Okay. So I'm curious
So awareness
about,
and trust.
say that last part again.
So awareness and
Awareness
trust.
and trust. I'm curious about that, but maybe it would help to kind of set up how things are supposed to work, right? Because we know that our emotions are our feelings are communicating to us, and they're
Uh-huh.
telling us really valuable information in business. But if we learn not to trust those, or to not have awareness of those, or to misinterpret them, then we mislead ourselves. We feel like we don't trust ourselves to experience that correctly. And so, what's the, like, I guess, is it fair to say a proper role, or how is everything supposed to work? What's the relationship between feeling and emotion supposed to be? How should that serve us?
Supposed to is a really fun word.
Right.
Uh, that's a tricky one. Here's what I would say. When we are in a state of openness, allowing, flow, and trust, which we could call supposed to, though, I mean, truly things are different for everybody. So it's difficult to say there's one way where it's supposed to work. But when we're in a state of allowing and flow, what we'll typically notice is something's not showing up for me the way I would want it to, right? My business is feeling stuck and I'm getting really frustrated, even though when I started it, right, in your situation, I was really gung ho and I was excited and this felt great. And now I've hit this place where it's like, bleh. So the first step is noticing, right? I notice, wow, something's not happening. Second step would be recognizing, wow, where am I in this, right? What might I be? Where might I have walls or limitations or beliefs that I'm bumping up against, right? Which is actually, it's a cool perspective on it because it really is about our growth. It's not bad stuff. This is our opportunity to grow. And if it doesn't come now, it's going to come someplace else, right? So, and entrepreneurship, it is like the ultimate crucible, I think, for just clearing out all our old stuff. But anyway, okay. So first is awareness that there's something that is not showing up the way we want it to. Second is recognition. Okay, I'm in charge here. What's going on, right? Where am I bumping up against a limitation that I somehow have created? Oh, wow. Or like just going back to my example, oh, I have a really bad attitude toward business. Okay, that would be a limitation for me as an entrepreneur, right? Okay, what's going on? And we can actually, I teach my clients a little meditation that they can do to then go inside and say, well, where am I tracking this in my physical body? And then to sort of start working with that, allowing it to move, and then noticing what shows up differently, right? There's also an awareness
What
of,
shows
oh,
up differently in the terms of we'll have different experiences,
either
we'll
with
get
their
different
body.
outcomes.
Yep, because the first thing we're going to notice is something feels different in the body. Usually the next thing we notice is, oh, when I think about X, it doesn't feel so charged, right? Oh, I think about business and working with lawyers or whatever now. And I'm like, okay, that feels cool. Let's go. So there's a change, right, in my perception or in the emotion, in my mental state with it. Then we start to see things showing up differently in our external experience. Or we go, oh, you know what, I could do this with my website or with my, business or with my clients, where before that idea might not even have shown up, right? Or we get jazzed about a piece of something that maybe we either hadn't seen before or we were feeling stuck previously. So we start to notice, here's where things are happening differently for me externally. So then it just starts to happen. So the first step would be awareness that something's feeling off or stuck. Tracking what that is, allowing it to move, releasing sometimes our own belief, right? Recognizing the belief. And then, some people can just go, oh, wow, I released this belief that la, 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 right? Okay, great. That's great for them. Some of us get to think through it, right? And we get to kind of have our own logical conversation with ourselves. All right, here's, oh, this makes sense. I feel icky about business. That probably comes from here. Is that useful for me now? Probably not, because I'm an entrepreneur and I really like to have my own successful business. Great. So, what are the fears that I hold around that? And I can feel into that and go, oh, right, I'm afraid I'm going to end up over there. Oh, I'm afraid I'm not going to have time for myself. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to do what I want, right? That freedom value getting stomped on. Oh, okay, great. So does it have to be that way? No, it doesn't. Well, here are 5 different ways I can think of off the top of my head how I could set it up differently. So then we've had that logical conversation and we've satisfied that little piece that wants to,
Yeah.
and then we can, through a more logical process, then also retrain our thinking. So it's not even fighting with that belief or necessarily even releasing it. It's sort of rethinking it in a new and more useful way. So it can happen different ways for different people.
So this all kind of goes to then if I'm not getting the results that I want, if I'm frustrated, if I'm anxious, if I'm angry all the time, that kind of shows me that my energy is going towards fighting against blockages or energy that's being activated that's not really appropriate to the situation. But if I am just kind of comfortable and confident and expect the best and I'm not generating a lot of charged reactions, that the desired outcomes are just kind of going to show up for me.
Generally, yes. Yeah. I mean, that typically is how it goes. So it's whenever we're feeling frustrated, angry, anything, everything boils down basically to love and fear, right? So anything that's fear based, frustration, bitterness, resentment, anger, any of those things. So when we're finding ourselves having that kind of an experience, then that's our cue. It's our clue. There's something going on inside that isn't serving me where I am now. There's something I get to grow through to create what I'm really looking for.
So for the people who still will say, like, okay, but if I could just choose to be happier, I would. If I could just let this go, I would let go of it.
Yeah.
If it was that easy, I would do it. So what don't I understand? Like, how do you, how would you tell those people to get started?
That's an excellent question because, and I think there's a lot that's being shared and taught these days that it really is that easy, and it usually isn't, right? Or we would have done it already, right? I mean,
Right.
that's pretty obvious. So I think the first thing is let ourselves off the hook, right? That it should be that easy, that I should be able to just go, wow, I'm really angry. let me just let that go and then be happy, right? Or, oh, wow, I'm feeling really depressed. Let me just move into happiness. There's more to it, right? So let ourselves off the hook that it is that easy. When it becomes easier, though, is when we're able to find what's going on deeper inside that is that's limiting our experience of that joy or that happiness or that motivation or excitement. And that's one of the things where there are a lot of different tools that we can use for this, right? And some of them we can learn ourselves and do. Some of these, it's easier to have someone else help us. Uh, but one of the great tools is this body recognition that we were just talking about. If I can take myself out of the mental game of let me analyze this, because the mind isn't going to let me find what's really going on, usually, right? If I'm stuck in a pattern of anger, frustration, any fear-based pattern, the mind is holding on to that, right? It's running that pattern. So I can't, it's that old, I think it's Einstein. You can't solve a problem from within it, right? So I can't use my mind alone to resolve something that is being run in the mind. So go deeper, go in the body, and we will get clues. We can work with those clues. We may not understand all the clues, but we don't need to.
And so
We
in,
get to allow that to move, and that will help us. It's not always, a one shot, oh, quick, let me check in. Oh, great, that shoulders thing just moved. Great, now I'm,
right.
rocking. We may get to do it several times.
Yeah,
We may get
especially getting
to,
started, I would think.
very much so, right?
So, in that initial step, somebody feels kind of like overwhelmed by all this, and you're saying that recognize that it's not just an easy let it go process.
Yeah.
Is it also fair to say, well, when a lot of people do that, will they generally experience it almost feels like it's getting worse initially when they start moving towards that?
I've seen that happen for people, and I've seen it go the exact opposite, where literally people would finish with a session that they've done on their own with the training we've done, or that we've done together. And they literally, I've heard people say, walking out of a session, I feel like I could climb a mountain right now. So it may be that the system is at a point where it's ready to just, whew, let this go and really dive in and move. And there may be levels and layers and lots of old stuff that we built upon, right? Sort of adaptation upon adaptation upon adaptation, where we get to do a little archaeology.
So, what's the comfort or encouragement to those people who say, well, I felt bad before, but I feel worse now. Why am I even bothering with this?
That the process, that period where we actually feel worse, is usually pretty short. If we stick with it, it's usually short, and the change in experience after we've gotten through those next couple layers is even bigger. So it's one of those, we go deeper, deeper and feel smaller, smaller, and then it's just an even bigger leap out of it. And that's been my experience personally, and I see this with clients as well.
Yeah.
So trust is useful. Trust it can be short if we stay engaged, and and stay with the knowing that it makes an even bigger leap afterwards.
Yeah, and that's kind of been my experience too. Is that moving into like learning to release the anger was a pretty painful process. But if I compare it to 40 years of low level anger that I was just holding on to all the time, and then yeah, if
Yeah.
I have 2 weeks or a couple months of more intense anger, it really kind of pales in comparison. Even though it's easy to lose sight of that perspective.
Yeah, it's a valuable perspective to hold on to. And if we've got others who are supportive of us, a family member, a good friend, a colleague, a practitioner, that makes it easier. It keeps us it just makes it easier for us to stay
Yeah.
focused on the process and where we're headed instead of, oh my gosh, this just feels crummy right now.
Right, right, right. Okay. So where do we go from here? If we've the shows for entrepreneurs who feel like they're struggling, not getting the results they want, or maybe somebody who wants to get into business but is afraid. Have we covered what they need to hear pretty well?
Um, it feels like there's one more piece. Yeah, okay. So what I would want to reiterate with that, especially, well, it's for people who are starting and people who are in the process also, really. Uh, Fear. It's everything boils down to fear. All of
Yes,
our
excellent.
limitations boil down to fear. So it's a strong, it's a really strong energy. It's an intoxicating energy, actually. And it's easy to kind of, once we're in it, to sort of stay in that spiral. So, whatever we can do that even temporarily moves us into a place of a love based energy, right? So, joy, happiness, gratitude, what have you. Anything that gives us a break from that pattern, right? Because usually it's easy to fall into that and stay in it. So even if we can break out of that for a few minutes or for an hour, uh, it loses its grip a little bit. So the practice of consciously experiencing something else is really valuable. It may not feel like this is specifically about my business in the moment, and it is. Because the more we can do that, and easy things, puppy dogs always work. Uh, Flowers usually work. A walk in nature often works. The happiest song that just makes you want to, get up on your floor and dance. Um, Things like this that just, it's a break that just goes, right now I'm feeling joy, right? Gratitude, meditations, things like that will give us that little break. And so we know that gives us the knowing that the fear isn't what's true. It's an experience, but it's not our truth. So the more we get comfortable and get a space on that, the more we're able to move into that place, that love based place at will. And that's where our vision comes from. That's where this feels strange and kind of scary, and I'm gonna do it anyway. That's where that comes from. It's not fighting the fear. It's moving into a different energy for a while, and then we're able to blossom.
And is the dynamic there that in the current situation, our subconscious is trying to keep us safe, but it could be using the same technique it came up with during that
40
traumatic
years
event
ago.
as children when we really were at physical harm, possibly, or emotional harm, or had a real risk that just doesn't apply now. And so it's just a matter of kind of retraining the subconscious that it's okay. You're not still in that situation. Here's some experiences to build on to establish that.
Very well put. Yes. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just using old adaptations, right? It's like we're starting a construction company, but we're still working with our little Tinker Toy, set with our little plastic hammer and things. And so we're trying to use tools that were useful at a time that don't fit the current situation,
Yeah.
right? So rather than even fighting that, we can acknowledge it and say, okay, I've been grateful that these tools have been useful for me up till now, and I get to graduate to a new, bigger, more grown-up tool set.
Yeah.
And the place where we're able to access those more grown-up tools, or those tools that are useful for us in our path forward, is moving into that place of any kind of love-based energy.
Yeah. And to the people who are watching this, the thing to take away is not necessarily a deep understanding of the process and how it's going to work. It's still just going back to that recognition, awareness, and acceptance. If you're watching this and struggling with these things, the thing that you should just take away is just the feeling of hope and encouragement, and that it is brighter on the other side.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add to that is that acceptance of the fact, okay, I'm in my own creation, therefore I can change it,
Yeah.
right? To
So
really know it is in our power to change that.
So let's go get away from the fear and negative side and talk
Uh-huh.
about the love side for a while. For just, got
Okay.
about 12 minutes left here on our time. So what's on the other side?
Well, I certainly can't say that I'm there 100% of the time and that I've got it all figured out. And what I will say is the experience is both greater possibility, greater vision, more energy on all levels, physical, mental, all of them, and a much how do I want to say this? There's a much better relationship with self, right? Really, I'd say entrepreneurial ventures are very much a reflection of our relationship with ourself. It may sound strange, but really that is kind of what it comes down to, largely, right? Largely. Uh, so when we have that better relationship with self, I now and my clients can now go, oh, there's that voice of fear. Now what do I choose to do with it? It's like everything has its place in a much cleaner way, and we're able to recognize and be more at choice around what we're doing. Whereas before, and still sometimes I'll be honest, right? I'll fall into a fear pattern and go, ah, and just fall in, right? Like into quicksand or something. And even if when that happens, I still recognize what's happening. Okay, I see myself falling into this. And while it may still be a little bit sticky, I have the tools and I have the awareness to ultimately bring myself out of it, learn what's there to be learned, and bring myself out of it. Um, so the point I would say is like there's a much greater distinction and a much greater freedom to choose what we're putting our attention toward and what we're creating for ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is what really opens us up to essentially really our limitless potential, right? We're at that place where we are at choice.
And this kind of goes to the idea of trust that we spoke about at the event, that if you don't understand this and you're just overwhelmed by it and you're not managing it in any way, you're just kind of a slave to the process, caught up in an avalanche. But once you start to see the other side and learn to process those energies to not be activated all the time and let it flow through you more naturally, that you can trust that more, so that when you get a feeling, you can
Yes,
ask, well, what does this mean? Not, oh my gosh, that something must be going terribly wrong.
absolutely. Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
And then we're able to exercise choice. Right. And
Yeah.
then we can put our energy where we want to instead of just wherever, our old programming is taking us.
And to the idea, I think, of how things are supposed to be, we are, I mean, by creation or evolution, designed to feel safe and happy and secure. We communicate in emotion incredibly quickly. We're cooperative species designed for love and engagement, and if we're not getting that, it's a sign that something's not going right here. You're made
Absolutely.
for this. Get out there and do it.
Well, we are, and that's one of the things, one of the recognitions I think that's been helpful for me and for my clients is that this is our natural state. We don't need to do a whole lot. We don't need to gain learning and gain understanding so much as we get to just let go. Like a snake shedding its skin each year or however often that happens. We get to simply let those old things go. And then our truth of who we really are is just there. We don't
Yeah.
need to create it. We need to simply allow it.
I love it. I love it. So, what's next for you?
Wow. Well, so I'm creating a new website and launching a whole new program because I really, my work has just it's expanded a lot, and I've really boiled it down to the piece that I think is the most important for people, which is really our option and our possibility to create our life on demand. So with business, with relationships, whatever aspect of our life, with our whole life, if we want to do it differently, to know that we are the conscious creators and refine those skills so that we're actually creating consciously and not, willy-nilly out of a bunch of old stuff that we've got hanging out behind us. So it's exciting to be taking this out to work with groups more. I have really distilled the process so that people can go through it more on their own as well, and it can be more of a private teaching and learning for people rather than just having to work with me. Because we're at a point, I think, in our human evolution, if you will, where this really is available to all of us. I mean, in principle, it always has been, but it's been harder to access. It's accessible now. It is there for all of us, and the potential for tapping into it and what we want to create and the impact for ourselves, our businesses, for our families, for the whole world is limitless. And so I'm excited to be able to do this in an even more profound or more lasting way for people and for more people to help move everything in the right direction.
Yeah, exciting. And this is going to be kind of headquartered at katherinekrupka.com.
It is very much so, yes.
Okay, awesome. Any final thoughts, closing words?
Yeah, yeah, I'd want to say three quick things. One is recognize entrepreneurship is a crucible, right? It is the ultimate learning point for all of our internal stuff. And so be gentle and be okay and don't go into judgment around yourself just because, oh my gosh, this is hard. Just yeah. And so it's like an AP course in high school, right? It's really intense. It's those 2 weeks before finals where everything is really intense. So recognize that's what it is. There's nothing wrong with us. It's this is our process, and we've chosen this for our learning. So be gentle, be aware, and be curious. Curiosity is our best friend in the process.
Awesome. I love it. And I think you're exactly right about entrepreneurship as the crucible. And that's why I focus so much on entrepreneurship because these ideas are important for everybody. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of times, if you're just unhappy at home or if you've got a job and you can do well enough to get your paycheck and not get fired, then you could just kind of live with this low level unhappiness for a long time. But as an
Yes.
entrepreneur, the whole idea of entrepreneurship is to how did you say it? Attract the outcomes that you want.
Yep.
Yeah, right. That's why we're here. And if we're not doing that, if we're blocking the desired outcomes with negative energy or emotional blockages, these kinds of things, then it's going to be a real problem to getting the satisfaction and fulfillment and profit and time control and all the things that we want out of our business. So I really appreciate that you were here today to share this message, Catherine.
Well, and I love what you're doing. When I heard you speak that first night at Christine Gallagher's event, I just thought, "Ooh, he's up to something super, super valuable and super important." So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited about what you're doing.
Awesome. I love it. Can you hang on for just a second after I sign off here?
Absolutely.
All right. I'll be right back. So I think we covered it all during the interview. And I just want to reinforce again, it's about the feeling, it's about the energy. So keep the hope, keep building the awareness, keep building the recognition, keep moving towards acceptance. That's all you have to do. You don't have to worry about the outcome, you don't have to worry about the destination, you don't have to worry about understanding. Just keep moving forward. So until we speak again, be the person you want to be, build the business you want to build, and have the successful life you want to have.